Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk. So, I'm Kierthana and I'm a technical author at Canonical. So, when I proposed this talk, I was going to focus only on documentation and how to craft it for user needs. However, I have now included some broader aspects of it because not only is it useful to think about design and documentation together, but the examples that we will see today will show that they truly belong together in thinking, implementation, and their success. Okay. So I'm a technical author. So technical authors not only write documentation, but a majority of their time is spent in leading and directing documentation efforts of a team. And by teams, I mean teams whose focus can be engineering, business, operations, it can be any domain basically. One important aspect of directing the documentation efforts of a team is also to think about the design journey involved. And that's going to be the main focus of my talk today. Before, I strongly believed that design and documentation are like railway tracks, like they run in parallel towards the same destination, but probably never meeting each other. But my current role at Canonical and some conversations with my design colleagues there have changed my mind. So let's look at both these concepts together. Archita spoke about this yesterday. So, design thinking is creative problem solving. And I'm sure many of you can relate to problem solving. So, in a way, I feel design thinking can be applied to any situation that requires problem solving by understanding the basic needs and requirements. So, let's start at understanding and empathizing with the user. Then, when you consider both documentation and design together, it's about once you understand the needs, it's about defining the challenge or scope, maybe, and ideate how to solve that problem and represent the information, right? The next step would be to create the first prototype or draft and then test for bugs, verify if your information is actually accurate. So, in the next slides, we will see specific examples where design thinking helped documentation. So, typically, when do you engage with documentation itself or people who are responsible for it when you're planning to develop something new? If I ask somebody who's trying to build something new, is it at the beginning, at the middle, after you have a few features complete in your hand? So, the trend that I see is it's mostly at the end. But I believe even if we are not actually doing documentation when you're starting the development, we need to think about it as if you are going to. The act of thinking gives you clarity over the technical details, development timeline, and how the development timeline affects users, backward compatibility, and finally the documentation itself. So we'll see this example. Uh, let's say that you're trying to migrate users from version 5.0 or 5.1 to 5.2. While probably there's knowing open source development, there's also a version 6.0 on the horizon. So your typical development path does not look like this. This is too simple. This doesn't happen in real world. So it's not just migrate to the new version, drop support for the older versions, and yeah, you're done and ready. It typically looks like this. So support migration to the newer version while still maintaining backward compatibility and support for the older versions. Set up a testing pipeline for the versions that you're starting to support and probably the future one that's upcoming. Announce deprecation for the older versions, drop support. This may take a couple releases in themselves. And then truly migrate to 5.2 or whichever newer version that you want and be prepared. So only when you start thinking about this product timeline and how you're going to help the users through this process, which can be like different releases of your software, will you truly help the users migrate to the new version successfully without breaking their older deployments. And that is the successful user experience you would want to, right? So this example shows how engaging early with design thinking and documentation, or at least thinking about how are we going to present this to the users, helps. So the next aspect that they'll look at is influencing the design of a product. This is something that I've been really keen recently. So I also want to mention about the onboarding module that we have at Canonical. So we have a UX onboarding module. What happens is every new joiner in the company can select a product that they are not familiar with, basically behave as a new user, and they can work with a technical author to go through the product, install it, try it out, go through the documentation, and we, the technical authors, we observe or watch them as the first user. The learnings and feedback from this session are like incredibly valuable. That's what we have found. And these are communicated back to the development team. And over a period of time, I feel that this has actually shaped and changed how we think about product development. So, this is like getting a chance to influence the product design, like right at the beginning. And I also have an example that came out of this exercise. So we had this product which needed to be initialized. So the workflow went like, okay, during initializing, you have like 15 to 20 questions, which will have default answers selected. And it is the message given on the interface is that for new users, it is safe to stick with the defaults. So that's what most users will do, right? So when they are just evaluating or when they're just getting started with the product, you just select the defaults. And then you complete all the initializing steps and your deployment is ready. You try to launch an instance in that. The first step fails. Then we backtrack and figure out what went wrong. So when one of the questions had a default answer of not giving access to the relevant API, which is required for using the CLI commands. So now the user is stuck in a place where they can use the product with the user interface, but cannot use any of the CLI commands. If we had thought about documenting the user experience, or even like just roughly drafting the user experience, okay, this is what they do first, this is the next step, we would have averted this. Like we would have identified the gap in this workflow, and we can find either a different implementation, or if there are security reasons for not exposing the API in the first place, we could have given clear messaging on the interface that doesn't ask the user to like stick with the defaults, right? So this is direct influence that documentation can have on product design. So the next aspect is designing documentation for the right audience. This, of course, falls right within the boundaries of documentation itself. Who am I writing for? This is the question that most authors start our process with. Let's consider the analogy of a supermarket. You will typically find two types of users. Some users who will like browse through the supermarket, try and see what's there, what's available, what they actually need, and pick it up. And people who come in knowing exactly what they want, just go to that aisle, pick it up, and leave. This is the same in documentation. It is quite similar. If you are a new user, you want to browse around a bit, get a feel of the product, see what suits you, evaluate it, try out a few things, get some things wrong, and then like proceed. If you are an experienced user, you search for what you want exactly. You'll probably even not go to the documentation page, right? You'll just search with the keywords. In your search engine, pick up like the right authoritative source that comes up, and you'll get on with your work. So in this context, we have been very deliberate in approaching the home page for any documentation, because this is the page where which gets the highest traffic in terms of new users, potential customers, basically anyone who is browsing through. But it might also get some traffic from people who know what they want. Maybe they are looking for alternative features. Maybe they're looking for what's new and what has evolved in the product. So thinking deliberately about each of these sections that you're seeing here in the homepage, there are like 3 different documentation sets. So the introduction, the classification of different guides, things that are useful for the community, how community members can engage with the team who's developing it. So these have led us to converge on certain homepage patterns. And these patterns automatically bring in consistency and aims to provide information that's suitable for both users who are browsing and users who are more involved. So we have to identify similar alignments between different types of audience, because it's not scalable or sustainable to have like two documentation sets, one for new users, one for experienced, not in all cases at least. So it's important to identify the patterns in documentation that you can like provide, but still highlight what the users need. The next aspect is about it's the same thing, but I'll use a different example. Let's consider this documentation of a product that has two variants. One is a completely self contained development setup for prototyping on a single cluster. The other one involves setting up multiple charms and across clusters, which is well suited for scaling and production. So, if you look at the typical user journey, a potential customer uses the development variant to evaluate the product. They could also be experimenting new features before deploying it in production. So, once they've bought into the idea, the full scale deployment with charms is taken over. So, the challenge in documenting here is like deciding between these two. Um, so, do we follow the user journey or the product journey? The first one, if you see, I think it kind of follows what the product can do. Yes, we have different types of guides in there, but inside those classifications, we have grouped the topics, which is like, okay, you can either install this dev variant or you can install this production variant. For somebody who's new, they're not going to know which one to choose. It doesn't give that information right at the beginning, right? So you are confused, obviously. So, but the one on the right, I believe it actually defines the user experience right at the beginning. So if you just say, yeah, in real time, it wouldn't just say dev variant, production variant. It would say for this variant or for new users and for Snap users or for Charms users. So it can be defined that way. And then your user journey, once it is decided, you can go inside and find just the information that is relevant to you. That makes the users feel more comfortable. So when trying to solve this challenge, some of the questions that I asked is like 80% of the documentation is same for both of these variants of the product. So how should I represent this? And whenever I write a how-to guide, should I give steps for both? Because most of them might be similar. There may only be like certain commands that are different. And how do I highlight just that difference? And how should it be represented visually? Should it be like with tabs, with menus, with drop downs? So I'm just talking about these questions here rather than the solution, because what worked for me might not work for your product. So the point is that it is important that you ask these questions to yourself, to your entire team, and have a discussion about this. That will open up more avenues for representing the information accurately and in the best way possible for users. And this last example that I want to use is about um, designing documentation, but it is the other side of the first example that we saw. There we saw the product timeline get importance as you try to migrate from older versions to new versions. It makes sense at that stage. However, when you start documenting for the public, there is a different approach required. So, one that places lesser importance on ourselves, on what the product can do, like rather than thinking about, okay, our product, this is what I'm communicating, but rather thinking about how it is being perceived by the users. Let's look at this TOC example. It looks pretty structured to me at first glance, but it follows the product timeline. So let's see. If you go through the contents of this, I'm not using that exact content in the interest of time, but if I go through this, if I want to access the Android instance using the tool that is mentioned there were 3 different ways to do that. The first option that was available is this, because this exposed the ADB service when there is an instance creation, but this was insecure. But this was the only option available when the team started developing this. So since it's insecure, it's not great, right? So you try to give a compromise. through the SSH tunnel. So you document that. Okay, this is not really great, but this is what we have. So you can use this tunnel and like establish a secure connection. And then still it's not what we want. It's not the full secure connection method that we want to deliver to the users. So we developed this tool which would allow them to establish that secure connection. So this is the secure one. This is the easy one for the users. But all these three remain documented because it followed the product timeline. Because, yeah, we developed this first, we developed the second, we developed this third, document everything, give everything to the users. Yeah, that urge to represent everything that you developed is common, but I think you have to constantly reevaluate what is the current user journey, what is the current user experience. And like one basic question, when you have the secure method, why even broadcast the insecure method where somebody new could like use that and have their deployment broken, right? So doing this exercise, so for correcting this, we did an exercise that kind of mapped out the user requirements, drafted a user story, and then we conducted a few user experience tests that I was talking about before and arrived at this. So it helped us understand that all users need is a secure ADB connection to the Android instance, and they need two types, like either private access or public access. So from this, we went to that, which is much simpler, more concise, and they can just take exactly what they need. So I want to end with this beautiful connection that one of my colleagues made between engineering, design, and documentation. So engineering is not just coding, although that's what we see it as, development and engineering. It's not just coding. It is solving your problems in a systematic way. And design is not just about good visuals. It's also about understanding the needs of everyone involved, like asking the tough questions or even like the silly questions, silly sounding questions, actually. And documentation is not just writing content, it's about guiding the user's path with your knowledge towards success. And once we understand this, we start to ask more questions. We start to be like more diligent and deliberate about the whole process itself. So this was the idea between combining design thinking and documentation for me. And if you are interested in documentation and want to get more involved, there are several ways to participate. I'll highlight a couple with that's related to Canonical. So we have this Open Documentation Academy that's sponsored by Canonical, which brings together all of the company's technical authors to help people explore open source through documentation. So in the panel, they were discussing how it's not that just you don't have to be like really just technical, or you don't have to know coding to enter into open source. Yes, you can get there if that's what you're interested in, but there are other things to contribute to. So the Academy aims to lower the barrier of entry into open source by offering a curated list of documentation related tasks. And we pair newcomers with experienced mentors, other authors in the company. Anyone can select a task, work on it with guidance. You will have that real mentorship and handholding when you're going through that task, and you can actually end up with meaningful contributions to open source documentation. And that right there is a good starting point into open source, and from there, yeah, you'll be more interested. You can explore other options too. And the Academy also hosts community office hours. It's currently every Friday evening for the India time zone. But these hours are just really friendly banter about documentation among authors and interested community members. We have even spoken about like things apart from documentation, just what note-taking tools to use, and what command line aliases we use. How many command line aliases do we have? So it's actually a warm, relaxed, welcoming space, and we have had some genuinely insightful conversations there. And in fact, the Academy has been so successful that we have even hired a technical author from among its participants. So it's mutually beneficial. So come join the Academy if this stokes your curiosity. The other option is like one step further from the Academy. You can also become a technical author yourself if that's what you're looking for. We have lots of positions open. Our plan is a 3-digit cohort of authors at Canonical, and now we are low 2 digits. We are just 32 or 33. So there's a lot of opportunity here. Check out the role if you're interested and spread the word if you know someone who might be interested. Thank you. I'd be happy to take questions now or later. I'll be around for the rest of the day.